Welcome to the KOMO Sports End Zone podcast with KOMO Sports Director Niko Tamurian and Najee Moye.
Well, how's it going? And welcome to the KOMO Sports End Zone podcast. I'm Niko Tamurian. He's Najee Moye. Naj, ready to go with the Mariners. What's going on, my friend?
This is a good time of year. There's always a good time of year. I feel like I always start with saying this is a good time of year. But I'm getting antsy because around this time of year, football season is about done. But boys of summer are coming, man. I mean, in the middle of February and just this month, there will be literal baseball.
Wow,
in Arizona.
It's baseball's baseball.
Literal baseball. I mean, I'm excited, and I think a lot of Mariners fans should be excited for this year. I know my tone has changed in the past couple of weeks because they have been busy. The Mariners have been very, very busy with a lot of trades in past weeks and months. I'm sorry, not months, but mostly weeks. I'm trying to get that lineup right, Niko.
Well, here's the thing about it is that when you look at the moves made in an offseason, now there's times you can tell that like you can be leery about, okay, they didn't do enough. And I think that's the thing a lot of fans felt about the Mariners heading into the 2023 season. And certainly now in this heading into the 2024 campaign, you're like, okay, they made a lot of really nice moves. I think ultimately, though, when you don't know the end result of that until the end of the season.
Yeah.
I mean, I go back, AJ Pollock last year was a signing that got a lot of flack from Mariners fans. I don't think anybody had an idea he'd be that poorly performing for the M's, right? And I think and that's not a knock on AJ. It's just one of those things that didn't work out.
Right.
Whereas, on the flip side, there's other signings that you're like, wow, I had no idea that would work out the way that it did. So you ultimately don't know. But I think given the way last season ended, you fall one game out in a season that was maybe supposed to be that next step. You miss out by one game. And then there was the fallout from the press conference. And, we talked about this back in the fall. That's how long it's been, October to February now. I think the point that Jerry DiPoto was trying to make is that the team is built for sustained success and should be for the long haul. And I think that's obvious. Anybody who looks at it. It's just the way that it was expressed perhaps wasn't the best at that time when you fall by one game and you've sort of, at least in terms of making the playoffs, regressed.
Well, yeah, that's the way it seems.
Yeah.
You end up missing the playoffs by one game, and it seems like you're flipping the whole entire roster. You're shedding almost the whole entire roster is what it seemed like.
Right. And that's my point is that even if the comments were ill received, the intent was there and was positive and was the right. And to your point, they've done what they needed to do this offseason. Now, whether or not it works out, talk to me in about 8 months, right?
Yeah.
But as far as what the issues were last year, striking out too much, inconsistent run production, to at least on paper drastically improve that, while at the same time keeping that young pitching core in place. I mean, I think we were talking about this a lot, Naj, in the fall, that they were going to have to make a big swing. And it would likely require losing Brian Wu or Bryce Miller. Well, they kept those guys. They traded Robbie Ray, who wasn't going to be able to pitch until probably July or August at the earliest.
Yeah.
You trade Marco Gonzalez, who was a fan favorite, and that one stings certainly from a fan perspective, and was the longest tenured Mariner. But you improved your offense, at least it seems, Naj, and you still have a rotation of Luis Castillo, George Kirby, Logan Gilbert, Brian Wu, Bryce Miller, Emerson Hancock potentially is like your sixth guy. I mean,
that is a deep rotation.
That's a really deep rotation.
That's a World Series level rotation. The problem is, are we going to score more than 3 runs a game? I mean, Now you mentioned just now about all the strikeouts. I think when you look at the guys they added, bringing back Mitch Haniger, big fan, by the way.
Oh gosh,
big fan favorite.
Got to stay healthy, but yeah,
got to stay healthy. But bringing in guys like Polanco, who it's more of a consistent bat, and even Urias too. These guys that hit 25 home runs a couple years ago. Nothing to sneeze at.
No,
nothing to sneeze at all. And then you combine it with the Cal Raleighs of the world and the Julio Rodriguez of the world, who's probably the second coming of Ken Griffey Jr. Did I say that? Oops. Maybe. But like you said, you keep that rotation in line, or in consistent and together. That way, if something does happen where someone goes down and you need to, fill in a spot, or if you want to get a big bat out there is plenty of trade fodder that you could use for that. But I just think, from where we were at the end of last year, or from that press conference actually, to about now. I think maybe I'm feeling a little bit better about the Mariners season, but I think you have to, like I always say, you have to compare it around the teams in your division. I talk about the Seahawks comparing their roster to the Niners. I will always compare the Mariners to, well, now the Rangers and now the Astros too. So it's like, what I mean, you have to build a team to compete directly with those teams.
Fangraphs gives the Mariners a 65% chance preseason to make the playoffs.
That's really high, I think.
Well, we'll see. They think the Rangers may regress, which I'm a little surprised at, but we'll see.
We'll see. Houston will always be there.
You mentioned making some moves. I want to dive more into this in a second, but I want to play this. I had a great one-on-one conversation with Mariners GM Justin Hollander. I'll dive into why I loved this interview so much in a minute, but I want to play for you a clip when I asked him about,
y'all talked about a lot of different
things. We talked about a lot of good things, but adding let me do this one more time. At potential of making another move. Here we go.
Okay.
Fruition, trade, sign, or otherwise.
I truly have no idea. Certainly we're answering our phone and we're making outgoing calls. I think everybody knows that Jerry's not shy about making transactions. I'm not either. Our whole group is driven to make the team as good as we possibly can. So it's certainly possible we could do something between now and opening day. I guess I'd be a little surprised if we didn't do something to our 40-man roster. I don't know how big or small that will be, but we're definitely open-minded to it.
One thing I really like about that, Najee, is the candor of it. It's very easy for a GM to be like, we'll see.
Yeah.
But the fact that he's saying, hey, we're opening, we have the phone lines open. We know that Jerry DiPoto is aggressive, and so is Justin by association. Talking about the notion that the 40-man roster will look different, most likely between now and opening day. That was a really good conversation. And I'll say this, in full disclosure for the audience, I'd been wanting to talk to Justin or Jerry, certainly Justin in particular, because he's got this unique story of joining the M's in 2018, rising to GM in 2022, rising through the ranks. And so at least in this recent research, I mean, certainly like you think about Jerry DiPoto and Scott Service kind of attached at the hip, right? Justin comes on shortly later, but right is the real building blocks for this rise. And that's what it is, even if you are disappointed by last year. It is a rise to end the drought. Maybe one step back last year to 2 steps forward this year. We'll find out. But
I hope you're right.
Yeah. So I really wanted to talk to Justin in particular about that. But I got to say, it was my first time in a closed door setting, one-on-one interview. We had done little back and forth 1 or 2 minute interviews on the field before. I've certainly asked him questions and other availabilities that he's done. There's no question. And I've always enjoyed his candor. But he was open and honest about everything. Not that I was expecting him to be deceitful or anything like that. But what really struck me is that, listen, he says, yeah, we were just as disappointed as the fans. And so we took that and we went to try and make sure, A, they don't feel like that again, and B, the responsibility to add firepower around their stars, the Julios and the Cals of the world, and that pitching staff. He went on to tell me that, it's funny, crazy stat. They've made trades with 9 teams so far, maybe more if they do another one.
Yeah.
That's 30% of Major League Baseball franchises.
That's
and so he took me on the ins and outs of what goes into one trade. He's like, it can be hundreds of calls and texts, especially one that they really wanted, like the Jorge Polanco trade last week.
That was a great trade. Honestly, I really, that was one trade that I saw. I was like, and then you do some research into his numbers, statistically consistent. I mean, you talked about guys, you don't want big lumps of runs, big lots of strikeouts, lots of home runs. Sometimes you get strikeouts and home runs, Yeah. But you want to have a kind of consistent burn and a run in an inning. Maybe if you can average a run in an inning, come on. I mean, that's fantastic. But I think also Mariners fans should be optimistic, is what you're saying.
I think so. And it's not an easy ask.
It's not an easy ask because, I mean, there's a lot of guys that many household. These are not many household names, at least in Seattle. Not right now, at least. Maybe by the time the All-Star break, maybe they could be.
The problem is certainly some of the comments that didn't sit well that we just talked about. There are certainly some fans that are maybe dwelling on that a bit, and I'm not telling them not to. It's not my place to.
Well, that's something that I've dwelled on, honestly. Could you see teams like I mean, apples and oranges. You see teams like the Dodgers, it's making big splash signings, and the Yankees doing the same thing. We know the Mariners weren't going to go that route, but they found ways to shed, maybe addition by subtraction.
I think so.
Maybe. I think
as
so.
much as you hate to lose some of the guys they got rid of, like Geno Suarez, true clubhouse guy, but the strikeout rate and it's such like that.
Yeah, it's something you want to acknowledge.
No question. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Naj. I think that I'm not going to tell any fan how they should feel because that's their own prerogative, but I think that some of the feelings about it maybe cloaked what has been a really awesome offseason for this team. If you think about it, it's just the chronologic order. Is that a word of it? The way things went down? Yeah, sure. Yeah. If you want to, yes, maybe. Thank you. Sure. Thanks for the save partner. If you look at, you missed by one game in the last weekend of the season is when things don't go. A few days later are those aforementioned comments that didn't sit well and certainly weren't phrased the best to not just the way that was supposed to be expressed, but also how it was received. Then the first moves to be made were the shedding you mentioned.
Yeah.
And so in this 6-week span you just miss comments that don't go well. Marco, Gino, somebody with maybe a bright future like Kelnick, we'll see. All with relatively, for lack of a better term, return of Major League Baseball guys, opening day starters, etc. And so that set the stage for what was kind of a fan base that was kind of like dejected, right?
Right.
But then the second half and continuing on of the offseason has brought back Mitch Haniger, has had the signing of Mitch Garver, has Polanco coming in just a couple weeks ago. And over the weekend, Gregory Santos, it was going to probably be the White Sox closer this year.
Yeah.
And now he's a Mariner. And
bolstering that bullpen.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. And so, I guess the roundabout point I'm trying to make, the rambling point, because I like to ramble on our podcast, is
ramble on, Niko. Ramble on.
I'll finish up here and then I'll let you dive into it. See what you think about this. My take is I think the Mariners have had an awesome offseason. I really do. I'd give it an A, high B or A, something like that, if you're grading it. It's just been masked a little bit by the fan base, having those feelings and maybe checking out and maybe not noticing these really good moves this team was making. And perhaps that's setting them up for a pleasant surprise in March and April. We'll find out. But I think they've had an awesome offseason. And I think they got to look at what this roster looks like now as compared to October 1st. And it's a big difference.
It is a big difference. I mean, I think you keep some guys, JP, you keep, Rowley.
Oh, have to.
And you keep Julio, obviously. But I think we're adding some great pieces around them. I long story short is I agree with you. However, it is not the way that, mainstream baseball media will have you believe how you should build a team.
You didn't get Juan Soto.
You didn't get Juan Soto. You didn't get. You didn't get Shohei despite the, all my pleas for him to come here.
Mine too.
So it's not exactly maybe it is the most traditional way, and that you're not throwing a cajillion dollars at people like some of these big, maybe it's just the way a baseball team should be built. But beyond that, when we talk about the hitters, the number one thing about this team, Gilbert still on the team, Kirby still on the team, Wu still on the team, Castillo still on the team, Miller still on the team. I mean, you go 5 deep like that. And, when I was preparing for this podcast, and I was going to ask Niko at some point, I think I'm going to ask him now. Niko, the way this roster is configured, it may be too early to say. We're still in early February. Pitchers and catchers haven't even reported yet. 5-game series. Not Yankees. Ooh, that was bad. Mariners, Astros. What do you think?
I think 3-2. I don't know who I call.
And the reason I say that is because the pitching is just so strong.
The pitching is going to be even better this year, in my opinion.
I mean, hey, and these are guys who have been young guys who are still young, but they had a season. Most guys, 2 seasons of just kind of like experiencing playoff baseball, missing the playoffs, unfortunately, and being in falling short against a team that would end up winning the whole entire thing.
And let me add one more thing here. We talked about Justin a minute ago, that clip we played, where he's kind of like, not ruling out anything as he shouldn't.
Yeah. You never know.
But you never know. What if there's some names still out there in the free agent market. We've long hit the drum for Blake Snell because he's a Seattle kid. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it may. And can you imagine? I'm going to daydream for a second, but that roster with that rotation I mentioned plus Blake Snell. I mean, you're talking about.
Sounds pretty good.
It does. And but even more, perhaps more realistically, a guy like Matt Chapman with the Blue Jays being out there, third base, and Luis Urias is a young and good contact hitter,
right?
And I think the Mariners are content to have him start opening day at third, no question. But suddenly, if you add somebody like a Matt Chapman,
someone who can get you a good 30 home run guy,
that's what I'm saying. You're looking at a team that isn't just playoff contention, but maybe even divisional and beyond that.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about, if you look around, okay, catcher Cal Raleigh. I think Cal is one of the best catchers as far as
power, at least.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In baseball.
Right.
We already mentioned the rotation.
JP's one of the best shortstops.
No question. Now you have Jorge Polanco, an established vet at second base. Hopefully and finally solving that conundrum at that position. I think, Ty France, I think, will bounce back. And then your outfield, you got Julio and Mitch Haniger and a platoon of sorts with Canzone or whatever.
Well, if Haniger stays healthy, I mean, he's big and strong if healthy, but I know Mariners fans are happy to see a familiar face again, of course, but they didn't see a lot of him whenever he was here. That's the problem, maybe.
Yeah. And that's the thing.
But I think the Mariners will also miss guys like Teoscar Hernandez, who kind of carried the team for a little bit last summer. There was kind of a bit of a power outage, and I think he kind of carried the team for a little bit. So
yeah, well, I think that's what they want to solve, is not needing that surge from one guy. And certainly I think Teo had a really nice year. It was perhaps inconsistent at times, but
streaky at times.
There's potential here. But you said a word about 30 seconds ago: injury. That's everything with this, because Mitch Haniger certainly has battled through some. Polanco has battled through some. Garver has battled through some. If those guys make it through healthy, I think this is a team with a lot of potential.
Right.
Nobody can predict how that's going to go, obviously.
Of course.
But it could become an issue as far as what happens down the line, because I mean, with any team, but you're talking about guys, your new acquisitions, some big splashes. Several of them are a bit injury prone, and that's a concern, no question about it.
And as I look at my phone, I just kind of just realized that there's a kind of a Seattle brotherhood kind of happening. Did you hear?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. We talk about JSN from the Seahawks, rookie receiver, being reunited with his brother. I'm not gonna get his name right. Cannon Smith-Njigba, claim off waivers from Pittsburgh.
So cool.
BS. I mean, CSM. We just love it. We're happy to, a little brotherly love in the city. That's not exactly Philadelphia, but it's maybe the
still pretty cool
West Coast version of Philadelphia.
Absolutely.
But I'm excited for this baseball season, Niko. We got things coming up though. We got spring training starting in late February, and then the season starts in late March against Boston. Here.
Pitchers and catchers report on the 15th.
Yeah.
The 20th is when the full squad gets down to Peoria, Arizona.
Not Illinois.
First spring training game is against the White Sox, the 24th.
Yeah.
And then the regular season opener, March 28th, against the Red Sox. Before we get to that, I do want to play the clip from Justin Hollander. I asked him about how they responded this offseason. Just kind of wrap up that conversation. I think fans will find it insightful. Go ahead, buddy.
No, I was going to say this is probably him talking directly to me, complaining about the Mariners roster.
It could very well be.
A couple months ago.
Here we go. Let me play this for you. To those fans, in regards to the moves you made this offseason in response to the disappointment of missing by one game.
I share their disappointment. And share and then some. I think nobody's more disappointed than our players, our coaches, our front office people, Jerry, myself, our ownership. When we go to bed at night and we realize we're one game short at the end of a 162-game season, that's a hard pill to swallow. It's really hard to accept, because we felt like we left a lot on the table, both in terms of front office things that we could or should have done to make our team better, and in terms of just basic execution things that we didn't get done. We worked very hard this offseason to build ourselves a bigger safety net, to make sure that we weren't counting on just everything going right, and if it didn't, we would come up short again. I think it's really important that we honor the talent that existed on this club by making the team better and getting us back to where we belong, where we were in 2022, which is a playoff team.
So there it is, Nash. What do you think?
He's talking directly to me, honestly. No, I mean, I completely get it, but I don't know. There's like I like the overall roster, but that being said, I'll always say this. Baseball has the longest season, and one game short, it's not great, right? This is why I freak out whenever there's like 10-game losing streaks in April, because these are, beginning of the year is like, okay, the beginning of the year, whatever, people should figure things out. But when you come one game short, I mean, that's one game you could have gotten back in, in May, or in July, I don't know. I think the length of the season, I've heard a lot of people talk about the season too long. It's a long season, but you can't take any game for granted at all.
And I think that's part of it is the idea that when you really, look at this, it came down to one game.
Yeah.
It came down to one of 162. That game in maybe mid-June, they lost 1-0 or something. I don't know.
My question is, if they made the playoffs last year, that big sell-off of, Teo and Suarez, does that still happen?
If they make the playoffs, I sound like Jim Moore. Playoffs. I still think to get to the kind of baseball they want, maybe not as drastic as 9+ trades.
Sure.
Maybe you're more apt to, instead of getting the immediate bat, if he's, of Mitch Haniger, maybe you wait for Robbie Ray. Although maybe that was always the plan. I don't want to put thoughts in the front office's head.
Yeah.
I suppose if you make the playoffs, the offseason is a little bit different. Certainly there's not this angst perhaps from the fans. There certainly still would be that urgency. Like, okay, you've got a window. You have young, controllable pitching for the next 4 years.
Right.
You have Julio. You have Cal. Make something happen. And I think Ty France is going to return to form too.
Yeah. Viva la France.
Yeah, man, absolutely. I love Ty.
I love seeing people dress up in French garb
for sure
at the games.
I think it'd be slightly different.
Yeah.
I almost think that not making the playoffs, as brutal and bitter and difficult as it was for fans, it may have set the stage for what could be a better season. Now, I say that based on what we're seeing on paper and not all the stuff we've already talked about, like whether or not it plays out or how the injuries go. Hopefully they're at a minimum.
Hopefully.
But here's the thing. We mentioned that rotation. I mean, think about that again. I'm naming the names again. Luis Castillo, George Kirby, Logan Gilbert. You're just...
Already, I'm nervous.
Bryce Miller, Brian Wu. I mean, and that's not to say they don't add somebody. I mean, there is a lot. And then Emerson Hancock, kind of becomes potentially anyway. Maybe it's another arm. That guy who at the start this time last year we thought was Chris Flexen, like that 6th starter in case of emergency injury, what have you.
Great name, by the way.
Yeah, right. But he didn't do so. He wasn't flexing on him last year, so he got traded. So, but hopefully he bounces back. You never want to see anybody do poorly.
Sure.
But man, the arms are so good. They short up the bullpen, and who's to say they won't make another move or two? I really, really like this team on paper, and I think that from top to bottom, there's kind of a motivation. We keep seeing the guys at Driveline doing their thing, like working out. They haven't been vacationing I'm sure they took one vacation, but they haven't been out like living the high life or whatever you want to call it on the off season. They've been working. And I think because the way last season ended, we saw it in the clubhouse in October. I mean, they were mad.
Yeah.
And they wanted help. And you saw that come out. And is it enough help? It looks like it, but we'll find out.
Well, some of those guys aren't there anymore. So that's probably why. But I don't know. I mean, this is very much a sit back and watch type thing. Because, oftentimes in baseball, you can see a lineup and just be like, yeah, playoff,
Yeah.
And this lineup you may see that for the Mariners. I just think when you compare it to Texas and Houston, there's some things that are missing, that there are things that you
possibly
that you want, but I think that will change throughout the season because like I said, the season is too long, not long enough, who knows. I'm just excited to talk about baseball again.
I'm so excited.
I'm just thrilled.
From a personal standpoint, as you know, I got my little guy. He just turned 2 in November.
Right.
That is one of my favorite things to do. The Wednesday.
He's been to games for, yeah.
He's been to a lot of games. Yeah, we take him to a lot of. It's my favorite thing to do when the weather's nice, even if it's still a little chilly. We bundle him up. Those weekday noon games or 1 o'clock games.
Great. Yeah.
Now that's in his current nap schedule, so we got to figure that out. But it's just so great to see the game through his little eyes. Like he has no clue what's happening.
Right.
He turned 2 in November, so when we were doing that, he's probably like a year and a half, and or not even a year old as you've gone through.
He'll be growing along with this team.
Yeah, that's cool for me to say.
Yeah.
What's really cool is it's just watching him look around and see all the sights, and like it almost gives you this own perspective. Like we're just lucky to be here and watch this team, and we hope for the best, obviously. And you want to hold things accountable, and you want to see improvements, no question about that. But it's just a great time. There's nothing quite like baseball, and I understand there's the declining stuff, and people are more into quicker games like the NBA or maybe more action packed like an NFL game. But there's something about being at a ball game.
There's something about being at a ball game that brings me back to when my dad used to take me to the Yankee games in old Yankee Stadium in the mid '90s when they were winning more championships. I remember the first game I ever went to was a Yankees Blue Jays game, and I was just like in awe of Yankee Stadium. It was a dump at that point, but it was just like, wow, this is just great. I was just happy to be there, and honestly, I think. And you talk about, and you brought this up, and I want to bring this up just a little bit because you talked about the speed of the game. Last year, they moved to a quicker pitch clock.
I liked it, yeah.
I loved it. The games were much shorter, and especially the Mariners, they moved up, the latest start time they could have, or the earliest, well, they moved up from a super late start time for these games to a little bit earlier so that, families can bring their kids so they don't get back home for like 10 o'clock at night, The game was moving that much faster. It's a great time to be a baseball fan because of those changes. Also, the game is much faster too. You'll see base stealing is up too. This is one thing that I think the Mariners will do well at this year is base stealing.
I think some of those new rules are almost made.
Made for the Mariners.
Yeah. I think we saw that last year. I think they'll be even better this year. One quick cool story on the family stuff. So I know you know this story, but I just want to share it because it was one of my favorite things of all last season. So during the All-Star week, and my wife brings our little guy, who's about 18 months at the time, maybe 20 months, to like the play ball park, and he's having a blast. They do the little thing where they draft you, and the Angelica Salem does the Kraken announcing too. She was doing the announcing. She's like, the youngest 20-month-old shortstop, Dario Tamurian, and he has no idea what's happening. He's like pushing the banner. He's like, and then he just runs out of the draft room because he just wants to run around. Yeah. But anyway, so she's after all that fun stuff. She's got him in the stroller and they're wheeling past T-Mobile Park and he's looking at the posters like babies do. And we go by Julio and he stops and he points at Julio and he's just staring at Julio's little poster. And you see it if you're driving on the third base side of T-Mobile Park, you see it. It's on the side of the stadium and he's just staring at it. And he's just like, even like she's going past it, he's looking back behind his head. And my wife took this picture of it and it's one of my favorite pictures of him. And then, so a few days later, I'm live at the ballpark and, there's some downtime as the guys are doing fielding and BP. And I said, Julio, can I show you a picture as he came out of the dugout? And Julio is just one of the nicest human beings alive. I genuinely cherish any interaction with him. He's a great guy. And I show him that photo, my son. And I'm thinking, as I show him this, I'm like, you almost forget because he's such a mature guy and this pro athlete. You forget he's 22.
Right.
And I'm like, at 22, I probably wouldn't have cared about that because I was not as mature as he is at 22. But I showed it to him at 23 now, but at the time he was 22. And I showed it to him and he's like, oh my God, that's the greatest thing. And he's like, and it was just this genuine, excited reaction. I'm looking at the photo and I'm not even looking at it. He's like trying to hug me. And I'm like, oh my God.
Oh my gosh.
He was so excited. He's like, let me see that again. And he's like, wow. And what's his name? And he spent a good couple minutes talking to me about it. And he sent over a little all-star thing. It was just really cool. It was one of my favorite things I've in like a personal interaction with anybody, but certainly when it's somebody of Julio's stature and how excited he was to see a little guy rooting him on. That was really fun.
I love that. I mean, he's the kind of, and I said this whenever he got signed, when he first kind of came up, and especially when he got signed to that big deal, I was like, he's going to be this generation's Ken Griffey.
Yeah. And to bring that back into our conversation, surround him with stars. And I think they've done a decent job of that this offseason.
I hope you're right, Niko. I honestly, I think this Mariners team is definitely above 500.
Yeah.
I know I've been griping a lot about the roster and how I kind of want more big backs, more home run guys, but the way it's kind of shaping out now, I'm not exactly sure if that's exactly necessary. I would like a couple more pieces, of course, especially a little bit more deeper to the lineup. But I think this is a team that can definitely make the playoffs. Injuries, we just send good vibes. We can still send good vibes only, right? Can we do that?
We still can.
We still can.
I think, if this team is healthy, what I think you've done without an incredible Shohei Soto splash, although there are big fish, as we mentioned, out there still.
Yeah.
One of the things that this team did was keep the pitching intact. That'll keep them in any game. That's what Scott Service always says. This pitching will carry this team. And he's right. Mm-hmm. And we've seen it time and time again. But what they've done in not getting the big, huge fish out there, I don't know that they had to, and we'll learn soon enough. They've just found guys who are going to put the ball in play more and not strike out. that you can see that was the goal. Even somebody like Teoscar, who, as you mentioned, had some really nice flashes of what his offense is. The strikeout rate was a little bit high. And certainly Gino, as much as he beloved, the strikeout rate was high.
Yeah.
And you found guys that, at least based on their history, we'll find out if they carry that to Seattle, based on their history, are not going to do that as more, and in turn should at least get more balls in play and perhaps generate more runs.
There's something you can say about high risk, high reward, but also low risk, slightly lower reward. Maybe you still get some reward.
I don't have a problem with that.
I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with that either. But we'll see the product on the field, and I think that's all that matters.
I agree with you. Najee, how good did it feel to talk baseball?
Boys of summer, baby. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Back to the postseason. We're certainly not done talking about the Mariners. My good buddy Rick Riz is going to be joining us soon. Not as soon as in this show, but in an upcoming show. We've talked about that. And Rick's one of my favorite people to talk to. I feel bad because I probably talk his ear off. But you know what? He loves talking baseball, and I indulge him on it. And just because I like picking the mind of the great Rick Riz.
Yeah.
So we can't wait to bring you that. Really going to get full board as spring training, and then eventually the new Major League Baseball season arrives. Naj, can you believe it?
Honestly, after this football season, I'm really needing it.
Yes. Let's hope that by March and April, we're talking playoff cracking and surging out of the gates Mariners. What do you say?
Well, I'm ready. I'm very ready. I'm very prepared. I almost lost my train of thought just then. I just was so blinded by it. I was like, yes, immediately.
I love it. He's Najee. I'm Niko. We'll see you next week.
Bye.